Hi, friends. Happy January. We're about to get into this conversation, which I'm really excited to share with you. It's such a good one. But I wanted to give you a quick heads up that if you were looking for a program to help you get strong in 2022, Kettlebells Made Simple is open for enrollment. It officially starts on January 23rd. It's an 8-week kettlebell program for beginners that does have options and takes into account if you have a history of pain or injury or if you're hypermobile. So if you are curious or interested in learning more about that and you'd like to join myself and Isabel, you might recognize her, she's been on the podcast before, you can head over to kettlebellsmadesimple.com or click the link that has been added to the show notes and the YouTube description. Also, if you have a moment, you enjoy the podcast, I would be really appreciative if you could hop over to, Apple Podcasts and leave a rating and review. This really does sort of help give the podcast street cred and helps people find it. So if you have a moment to do that, and please leave your Instagram handle. I will select a couple people every once in a while who leave reviews to send them out free podcast merch. So with that, thank you so much for being here. I really hope you enjoy the episode, and let's get into this conversation. This is Nikki Nablevy, and you are listening to Results Not Typical, a podcast that challenges the traditional narrative of Pilates and fitness while tackling misinformation that is keeping you from reaching your fitness goals. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Results Not Typical. I'm really excited to have Larissa Parson with me today. She is a joy coach. We're going to try that one more time. I'm going to write it down. I think you should just start it like that. Larissa, I'm going to let you introduce me. It's been a long time. You know what? I think you're here for reality like I am. We're going to leave it in. Can you introduce yourself, please? And I'm so sorry. I botched that. It's early in the morning here and the day after Thanksgiving.
Okay, I'm so delighted by this already. So my name's Larissa Parson. I am a joy coach and movement teacher. And what that means is that I specialize in helping people move their bodies better so that they can find more joy in having the already awesome bodies they have. I think that's it.
Yeah. And you also specialize in pelvic health, right?
Yes. I still have a specialty in core and pelvic floor health. And that is one of the places where we don't tend to find as much joy. So I try to change that up a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's a really important thing. And if I hadn't botched the intro, I was going to mention that that's part of what we're talking about today. So with that, anyone who's listening, though, this is real life, y'all. Conversations are not like perfectly curated. So I kind of love it. So let's start here, though, because I really appreciate your approach to pelvic health. And I do find that is one of the most depressing, scary conversations that we end up having to have. And I think it gets so clinical. Mm-hmm. And I think that it ends up becoming, and I'm not saying this in a judgmental way. I hope people who are listening or watching realize this. I think it ends up becoming wrapped up in our identity if we end up having struggles with it, like the common ones like prolapse, diastasis, and all of that. You know what I mean? And so I think the idea of can we actually bring joy back into this, and can we focus on the reconnection instead of the quote unquote dysfunction is really powerful actually for healing and being able to do things. Have you kind of noticed that in your experience?
Absolutely. I think that when we're looking to regain some function that's maybe been lost in terms of pelvic floor function and core function, the people who tend to, and I really hate to even start going down this language road that I'm going down. So let me back that up. And I'm just going to say that even if you never resolve your prolapse, you're not broken. And I think that's a really, really, really important lens to have on this, because as someone who lives with chronic illness, it's taken me a while to kind of wrap my head around the fact that I might never be able to digest all my food perfectly. And that's just a fact of my life. And so but there are ways to improve how you feel in your body when you have a prolapse or a diastasis, and you can resolve. Frequently, people can heal from them, frequently without surgery. And the people who tend to have the most success with these kinds of like interventions from PT or movement and exercise tend to be the folks who realize that there are going to be improvements and so-called setbacks, like gains and losses, and things are going to change, and they're going to feel better, and then they're not going to feel better, and they're going to feel better, they're not going to feel better. And it's this kind of whole process. And then if we're really open to the idea that this is a process and a journey and an exploration of like really understanding how your body works and what it likes and what it needs, then we get to the joy part. So like, it's not without struggle, and it's not without difficulty, and it's not without stuff that feels terrible. But I think when we take out the shame of this kind of stuff, we really get to the joy.
Yeah. And I think that a big piece of that too, to your point, is this idea of moving past, well, unless I fix it, I can't do other things, right?
Yes.
That's the thing that I see that just makes me bonkers is, well, this chronic condition I have can't be cured, or my diastasis isn't fully resolved or can't be resolved, right? Or I still have prolapse. So now I can never try to strength train again. I can never do X again. I can never do Y again, because the symptom happens and I'm not saying that we should like go into the symptom, but I think there's a lack of understanding that actually it's like, you can still do things. And in fact, you can still do things with these symptoms and with these things, and you can actually continue to live your life. Like, it doesn't have to mean like now this has happened and you can never do things again. And I think a lot of the time that's exactly what happens. You get a label, whether it's the pelvic health condition label or the chronic condition label. And all of a sudden it's like, you're now in this bucket, and everything that was movement wise in that bucket is just theoretically no longer available to you. And it just makes me nuts.
Oh, it's so maddening, because then like that just sucks all of the delight out of your life. And it's totally possible. I don't specialize in running at all, because running doesn't like my body and my body doesn't like running, and I'm not really interested in learning how to do anything with it. But running, I think, is one of those things that a lot of people who are having things like stress incontinence often end up having to stop doing, sometimes just for a while. And there's this really interesting kind of balancing act between, okay, well, how much is going to bother you to leak when you run? And how much do you want to resolve this as much as you can? How much do you want to start going back into it slowly? Like, there's this really interesting place where you don't have to live at the, in the binary of never leaking and always leaking, or never running and never leaking. Like, there's a lot of room in between there to play with.
Yeah. And I think I'm seeing, at least online, like, I'm not a pelvic health expert, but a lot of the people I follow who are the more, I would say, progressive physical therapists, for example, are like, it's okay while you're rebuilding strength if, for example, at the diastasis, a little bit of doming happens. I mean, I get questions from people, and it's usually in a group setting, and I say, well, you should check with your PT, but they'll be like, oh, I domed, I can't do the exercise. And on the internet, in something like that, it's like, I'm not the appropriate person to say anything. So I'm always like, check with your doctor, because I'm a little bit shackled here. But I've noticed that sometimes those are the people who then go back to the doctor who says, oh, there was any doming, just never do the exercise again. And I'm always like, I mean, it's just like one big sigh, because it's like, I think, like you said, especially with that type of thing, it's a balance, right? Is it happening a little bit or a lot? And how uncomfortable is it?
Yeah. And does it make things worse if you keep doing it that way? And you might have to play with that. You might have to have a backslide. I hate to say those words. Like, you might have to feel a little bit worse first to see how it feels. And then with doming, I mean, there's like, one of my PT friends, Jen Harrington, talks a lot about soft doming versus hard doming, especially for folks who have a really wide DR, because it can, like, it's basically impossible not to dome for them a lot of the time. And so is it soft? Is most of the engagement happening around the transverse abs? Or is it hard? Does it feel like, they're just like pushing against that abdominal wall. Like there's a really big difference there. Like how are we training our body? And then what are the nuances of like, instead of never do that exercise again, what is a way that you can adjust it so that it works for where you are now, so that you create that, that pattern for your brain and body to connect on. And then you might be able to increase the intensity and increase the load over time.
Right. Because at some point you're going to have to do things like stand up, squat down, stand up again. Like,
yep.
These are just in life. It's unavoidable. And so I think this idea of recreate, sort of trying to sidestep all movement for the sake of not kicking something up is really, I think it's really problematic. That's the word I'm going to go with. I think it creates some issues.
Yeah. We don't want to create fear of moving for people.
Right.
We want to create like curiosity about movement for people instead. Oh, how does it feel if I do it this way? Okay, that didn't work this time. Cool. It's very unlikely you're going to totally break yourself. Like we are so strong and resilient. You're not going to break yourself if you do it, quote unquote, the wrong way 1 or 2 times or 10 times even.
Yeah. And I think what's interesting is we'll probably end up meandering a little bit in today's conversation. Just because I think at least that's where I am mentally, I'll be honest.
I'm right with you.
But I think the thing is for me is that mindset carries over. We're talking right now about pelvic health, but then we start looking at chronic conditions, like especially when you have like those rare, weird things or like subclinical things, right? Where there's really just not a lot of great information. And there's also not necessarily a lot of great treatment. It's just not there for whatever reason or understanding of it. And it's the same thing. You sort of get slapped with this label and these set of like, well, don't do this, definitely do this kind of thing. And it just leaves you standing there going, well, that's just not very helpful.
I think it's even worse than that, Nikki. I think that it leaves you not trusting your body. It leaves you not trusting yourself and not able to like make any really truly informed decisions about what to do with your body.
Yeah, because share as little or as much as you like, but I know that you've talked about a lot more recently, like managing chronic conditions. So what has sort of been your experience with navigating that?
I'm just laughing because, so I'll share as much. I'm an open book about this. This fall, I had abdominal surgery to resection part of my bowel because I have Crohn's disease. And I had known the surgery was coming up. I didn't know when it was going to be. It could have been 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. I've been living with this for quite a while and living with the issue that led to the surgery for quite a while. And the recovery process, like I have knees that often don't cooperate with me, with my plans. And I'm used to being in kind of like rehab mode all the time. And this one still threw me. I still am just like constantly amazed at how much capacity I have lost in terms of what my body can do, which doesn't mean that like, I'm not beating up on myself for that. I'm like, okay, well, guess we can't do that. But the way that I keep finding out is by overstepping that capacity because, I'm really mindful and attuned to my body and totally listening all the time. And still, sometimes you got to pick up a heavy thing and you don't know if it's going to be too heavy. And so I've picked up heavy things and they've been too heavy. And I, was like back in bed for a day or two because I was in so much pain. I walked around a museum for like 3 hours with my kid. And that also knocked me out the next day. So in terms of managing, like sometimes it's managing the shitty mind talk that comes up, like the shitty self-talk where you're like, I can't believe I did that. Sometimes it's really just about being compassionate to yourself and kind of going, oh, that was too much. Cool. That's a really clear signal. I guess I need louder signals sometimes. And that's it. And then we start again with the rehabbing.
Yeah. I think what's interesting for me is, right, like I talk about my stuff loosely because I don't have a diagnosis for any of it because I have the thing where I walk into the doctor's office and I tell them things like, I don't sleep. I randomly pass out. My blood pressure and heart rate is that of a corpse. And they look at me and they go, well, you seem very alert.
I'm sorry. My eyes are hurting from rolling so hard.
And this has happened to me like with dozens of doctors over the years, right? And at that point I go, well, I know I seem very alert, but these issues are real, right? And and I'm not gonna like share the whole story, but it's like the same song and dance. And basically by the end of the appointment, I have shut down. I have not gotten what I need. I go home. I still have my problems. As I've gotten older, my problems have gotten worse. My husband, who is in healthcare, ironically enough, tells me that this is actually pretty normal. As you get older, vessels and things don't work as well, so your problems might exacerbate. But the long short of it is I still have these problems that I've had for a very long time. And the way I feel with it, because for me, it manifests as like really bad fatigue, chronic dizziness, brain fog, like inability to focus, like all of these things. And my self-talk turns into a lot of time, well, I should be able to do this.
Yes.
I should be able to do this.
Completely.
I didn't do that much. Nothing's wrong. Nothing happened to me. Nothing happened in my day. How come I'm tired? And that like needing to have to just be like, well, today is that day. We have to wait it out is infuriating.
It's excruciating, especially for people who like to do things. Like, and like, okay, so there's like the systemic problem of capitalism and like, you know, do, produce culture for sure. But there's also kind of personality type and just like being busy in your brain all the time and wanting to do stuff, which is me completely. And like, I totally get that completely. Like, it's so infuriating because you think you should be able to do this and then you can't. And then you have to sit there and go, okay, right. Should just go out the window. Like, and. Yeah.
It's this whole narrative. And I think that that's what's so interesting about this is, I don't know if you've had this experience, but you share the symptoms and what you have to do to manage them. And people go, oh, that sounds terrible. Right. And I'm like, no, that part's fine. That part's just my reality. I'm used to that. My symptoms are my normal. So it's like, if that's all I wake up with, that's great. Whatever. It's like, it's actually, I think the exhausting part is the self-talk.
Yes.
And the navigation of having to express to other people that you aren't in a state to be able to do the same thing as them. And always having to like then give a backstory instead, because the backstory is exhausting, instead of just being like, so I'm going to have to be quiet today.
Yeah.
And just, that's it. There doesn't have to be a whole explanation, but it's like, I don't know about you. Like I even have to do this with my husband. I'll be like too tired to go on a walk. And he'll be like, you want to go on a walk? And I'm like, no, I'm going to stay home. And he's like, no, I really like you to come on the walk. And I'm like, well, and then I have to like tell him like the 45-minute story in my head of, wow, I finally got to this place where I could say, no, Nikki, you're not a good place to go on a walk today. And I'm like, that was exhausting. I'm so mad at you for doing that to me. He said 5 words, by the way. And it's like,
yeah.
But I think that's the hard part about managing something chronic, right? It's that interaction.
Yes. It's exactly that. I mean, this is not chronic, but like I was recovering from some vaccines yesterday and like my husband wanted to go for a walk and I was like, no, I don't want to go for a walk today. I don't feel the need for a walk. I'm lying in bed. Thank you very much. And like, you know, yeah, it's just kind of a lot. It's kind of a lot to think about that. And it's, you know, I think that as a movement teacher who shows up teaching, I teach weekly classes, that there is a lot of pressure on our bodies to just keep showing up even when they don't want to. And I've had to really dial in to what is the right thing. So I usually teach Friday mornings at an early time for me, which is 9, which is not early for some people, I realize. But it is for me because I have to like feed people breakfast first and stuff like that. And I canceled today's class because it was the day after a holiday. I was like 2 people are probably going to come. And also maybe I just need a little bit of mental space for my body to rest or for my brain to rest, to not be on, to be, you know, just chilling for a little bit. And it was so much mental and emotional work to get myself to that point, to just sit with the like, oh, it's uncomfortable to cancel class because I feel like I'm supposed to show up all the time because my work is in my body. And, you know, I can roll out of bed onto Zoom and teach a class. I can. But do I have to?
Yeah. And I think that expectation gets extrapolated with this idea of if you teach a form of exercise or a form of movement, you're supposed to be able to perform all the moves. You're supposed to be, right? You're supposed to be in like this pinnacle shape. You're like all of that stuff. And it's like, in what world? Because I used to teach group fitness. Let me tell you, the people who can do that stuff, when you see them, when the screen turned, like I saw these people. These are the people on the DVDs. I went and saw them. They filmed the DVD. It was incredible. This is what made me decide to quit teaching group fitness. If they film, I saw them film the DVD, and they would end cut, right, and the people would all of a sudden just stop, collapse in on themselves, and then like limp off the stage, right? Like no longer could like perform like hip flexion because it hurt so bad. And then like the person next to them is like all taped up in the rock tape and all the things. And these are the people who are supposed to be like the pinnacle of fitness, and they can do really incredible exercise, but also they can't walk off a stage. And it really, to me, I was like, I refuse to participate in this anymore. That was that's what did it in for me. Was I was like, this is a legitimate lie that is not making people better. And I will not and I was like, I personally will not teach this anymore. I will not stand for it. And that was it. But how many people are still doing that to themselves because they feel so much pressure to?
Yeah, I can't imagine. I mean, this is part of why like my, the space where I teach most of the time right now is my membership community. And a lot of the folks in there would really like some strength training. But do you know what I'm not teaching? Is strength training. Because first of all, it's not my specialty. Like I'm not trained in teaching other people how to lift heavy things. And then second of all, I can be like, oh, my friend Nikki has a program coming up. You know? But also like, because of the amount of presence and focus on helping other people move their bodies means that when I am moving my body in the context of a movement class, I'm not doing it for myself, and I'm not always taking the best care of myself that I can. I really try to model it, but it doesn't always come through. And it's been really interesting this fall. I just started teaching a 6-week Restore Your Core series where I was like, oh, we're going to just really slow down because I couldn't be on hands and knees when I started the course, like could not do it because no core strength. And it's been really interesting because I've been trying to make sure that I give everybody as many options as I can in the class, including myself. And I'm like, oh, here, let me show you how to do the hands and knees. Oh no, sorry, I'm going back to the wall. Like in the middle of the cueing, I'm like, oh, actually, I can't do that. And it's really hard to stop myself from going to that place where to the thing I know I can't do. Because I'm like, well, what if I can do it this week? But I can't.
Yeah.
And I don't want to limp out of class, basically, you know?
Which I think is modeling self-care, you know? And I also wonder how powerful it is because I think sometimes people feel so bad that they can't do the whatever version of the thing, right? In a class. Mm-hmm. I also think it's probably really powerful for people to see like, oh, wow, she can't do that right now either.
No.
I think it's reasonable to model like, this is kind of my issue with, I think this is like the fitness narrative, but I also think it's the yoga narrative and the capitalist narrative, right? It's the same narrative everywhere. Attaching a name to it's silly because it's just our culture. Yeah. Right. But this idea of like, well, if you can do it, I can do it too. Or like, always strive to be your best or train like an athlete. I mean,
sorry.
No, right? But it's like on every freaking quote card on Instagram. And I'm like, but this is where I get so frustrated and tired is because if you actually have stuff in your body, and if you are a human being, if you don't have stuff in your body, I'm not trying to like, this isn't a threat, but like at some point you're probably going to experience something, right? It's like our bodies have both limitations and capabilities that we aren't aware of at the moment that we have.
Yes.
And I think it can be very empowering to explore our capabilities, but I think it's also really important to acknowledge our individual and personal limitations. Not as like, do you know what I'm saying?
Completely. And I feel like, yes. Oh, I have so much to say about all of that. I don't know where to start. I think that, like, first of all, it is this line, I think, as a movement teacher, an exercise teacher who really believes that we can increase our capacity, however much we can. But there is this like bigger box of what are the actual limitations of the body I am in, and they may change over time. But what is for sure is that every body is going to be disabled at some point, like in some way. That doesn't mean like at some point in your life, you are not going to be able to do stuff. And it may be just a little bit of stuff and maybe a lot of stuff. So like there's this bigger container of the limitations that your particular body has, but then there's also the potential still to hold out a little bit of like, I'm going to call it hope, or hope is the word that's coming to mind, that, okay, well, I can increase that capacity just a little bit, but I don't have to increase it so much that I'm like an Olympic weightlifter, because that's not the body I am in. That's also not the life I have. I can't spend 8 hours a day, or however many hours a day people do training, getting massaged, getting, all kinds of hands-on treatment in order to maintain my body's level of comfort with that amount of work. Like, I don't have that life, and I don't know many people who do. So that's the first thing. I feel like there's something else and I lost it. So carry on.
Well, when it comes back, feel free to jump in and cut me off. And
share. Oh, I got it. That's great. There's nothing like being in your mid-40s and trying to keep several trains of thoughts going. It just like doesn't happen anymore. So there's a limitation of my body that I'm just like, oh, time does things to your brain. Okay. And maybe I could get more sleep and that'd be better. Anyway, so I spent some of this year mentoring new movement teachers. And one of the things that came up a lot in our sessions was, what if I can't do this, that, or the other thing? What if I can't do this thing without doming? What if I can't do this thing without, tweaking my back? Or what if I'm not strong enough to do this, that, or the other thing? And I was like, you just do what you can do and model that and tell people with your words and your language, what's the thing they can do that is different if you want to, take the next step on that train of like, there's a lot of different metaphors, on that train of progression through an exercise. If you want to make it harder, here's how you can do that. I'm not doing that. My body isn't ready for that right now. Like, not being able to do a thing with your body doesn't mean that you don't know things about it.
Right. And what I take away from that too is that it's a limitation within your body shouldn't be necessarily a prereq that stops you from showing up and teaching a modality or a thing.
Right. Yeah.
I think that's really important to acknowledge, because I do teach strength training, and I know a lot of people in strength and conditioning, and I am not as strong as a lot of those people for multiple reasons. I've been doing it as long. I have a bunch of weird condition flare-ups that like make it so I can't, if I want to feel good and not be an inflamed mess, I can't do things in heavy loads, which means my pull-up, for example, is like easy come, easy go. Mm-hmm. I can do a pull-up a few months out of the year, and then sometimes I can't. Right now I cannot. And right. But does the inability to do a pull-up mean that I can't teach an entire body of strength training work because to a whole group of people who need it, who, like they're also not there yet, and they might get there faster than me, who knows? But right now they're still trying to figure out how to pick up the kettlebell and choose the appropriate weight. I don't think so. It just means if someone wants to learn advanced strength and conditioning, I'm not going to, much like you said, you're like, I'm not teaching like more heavy strength training. I'm not going to teach advanced strength training and conditioning stuff. I'm going to send them somewhere else. And I think that's fine.
And I think that's really important, because I think that a lot of the time we get stuck in this idea of like, well, I should be able to be all things to all my clients. And that's simply not true. I refer my core pelvic floor clients out to PTs all the time because they get better results if we're working together. I can't do a lot of the things a PT can do. And so Like, why wouldn't I have them work with somebody else in addition to me, and maybe do something else? You know, like here's this chiropractor. He's this, like, I got practitioners all over the place. You need a team. And then if you have a specific goal, like I want to get a pull up, great. Here's my friend who can teach you how to do that better than I can. It's so, I think like that falls into the kind of toxic individuality, kind of capitalistic, like you just have to do it yourself mentality, which is really detrimental to creating more of a community of folks who are helping people feel better and get stronger in their bodies.
Yeah. And I think what's so interesting is that's really important for us in terms of referrals and working with clients. Yeah. But it's also, again, for anyone who's listening who has a chronic condition, whether or not you teach, it's also really important for yourself to realize that you're going to possibly have to, in fact, if you have something like that, you're going to need a team. And sometimes, even if someone in theory is supposed to be able to give you the answer, if they can't, don't look to that person for the answer, because they're clearly not going to get you the answer. And it's okay to have to bring people in. Like, I'm at some point, maybe in 2022, for example, I will probably finally get a diagnosis for some of my stuff. Mm-hmm. The reason why, and I loathe that this is how I'm doing this, I'm going to bring my husband in for show and tell.
Oh, excellent. He's been so annoying.
He's been taking my vitals. We have them all in a little notebook every day. He goes, that's really weird. I'm like, yeah, I know, it's not normal. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to bring him in with the little notebook, and I'm going to go, he's going to talk now. And I'm going to let him tell them what he observes in me. And it makes me irate that they can't just hear me.
Yes.
But it's twofold, right? It's like, I'm traumatized and I shut down. And they're not typically I had this person I have not met yet. I have a short list of people I'm going to try with, right? Mm-hmm. They often are not well equipped to hear me for whatever reason. And this might be a great time to talk about like injustice and like communication issues, right? And all the isms in the healthcare system. But because it's like, it does bother me that I'm like, wow, is this really going to work because I brought my white man cisgender husband in to speak for me? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it really bothers me, right? But also, I need him. I need him because I'm not doing a good job of communicating, and I need him because they're probably going to listen to him with some authority, even though he's just going to say the same things I've always been saying.
Right. So, gosh, there's so many layers to that. And I'm both delighted for you that you have him to do that, because that not everybody does. Mm-hmm. Like, not everybody has somebody who can come in and advocate for them in medical situations. And it'd be nice if we did. And it's also super annoying and frustrating that that's the case. I'm just like, I want to punch something.
Right. And even having that conversation where I'm like, yes, I'm extraordinarily privileged and I'm mad about it.
Yeah. And as you should be. It's not okay that is the case. Yeah. I mean, I find that it is really hard to get taken seriously as a person in a body when I'm talking to medical providers and saying, well, I know my body best. And I know this is normal for me, and I know this is not normal for me. I had a whole bunch of like really unpleasant interactions in August when I was first hospitalized with it turned into eventually surgery, because they were like, we can't trust you to go home and eat what we need you to eat in order to not have another flare up. And I was like, okay, I live in this body. I am an adult. I am capable of taking care of myself. I'm capable of doing 2 weeks of liquids if necessary. God forbid. And finally, I actually capitulated to them because I just couldn't take the labor of having to advocate for myself over and over again to kind of say, why is this so necessary? Why can't you trust me to know myself? Why can't you let me go home and see my kids and like just be?
Yeah. Yeah. I think that advocacy part is so hard and it's so exhausting, because that comes back to the medical provider doesn't see you, doesn't hear you,
Yep.
doesn't understand you, and then all of the bias.
It's so much. Yeah. I mean, just like the idea that you could possibly know yourself and have some expertise in your own body is kind of shocking sometimes to some. Now, I will say some providers are not like this, right? But it often comes as this kind of surprise or this kind of like, oh, you can't really know that. Like, what do you mean?
Yeah. And it's so, at that point, it's so, I'm pretty sure I must have non-compliant patient in every chart of every person I've ever met. That's my pet theory. I don't know. Mm-hmm. Right. Because then that makes me always go, but you just met me. You never see me. How do you know that?
Exactly. Like, how do you know that this is, it boggles my mind.
Right. But I think that, when we sort of look at that big picture view, I think this is what we're talking about when when we sort of talk about things like racism in maternal health care, right? This is the type of stuff that we're talking about. Like a gal who I follow on Instagram was talking about how, the nurse probably doesn't think she did anything wrong, but she was like, and I don't want to like parrot her words, but she was like, I asked for an epidural with my second child. Mm-hmm. And the nurse was like, oh, you don't seem like you're in that much pain.
I mean, like, how can you tell from the outside?
and it's that type of bias that makes racism, frankly, so insidious and so dangerous and so harmful, is that most people are not walking around trying to actively commit racist acts. I think that's what gets lost.
Yeah.
It's that there is this bias that creates a completely different lived experience.
Yep.
For you if you are Black versus if you are white. And then of course there's intersectionality in that. So like, I'm not ignoring that. I hope people realize that. But it does mean that two people can walk into a healthcare situation and walk away with two completely different diagnoses, different experiences, different opinions. Like and so I think we do need advocates, but I also think that we can be frustrated about the need of advocates, even if we have one, for that reason, because really it should be that we should just be heard.
That's correct.
And believed, right? Yes. I need an epidural now. Okay. Let me give you the epidural, because that's actually just like a bigger version of the I'm tired and don't want to take a walk today. Mm-hmm. Mm. Except it's harder. At that point, it's much harder to advocate for an epidural because of the situation and the pain that you're in than it is to advocate that you're not in a mood to take a walk, right? It's like the stakes are just so much higher. And unfortunately, the higher the stakes are, the harder it is to advocate. And I just, it sucks, because I think it just recreates the situation for so many people.
Absolutely. I mean, just having care providers who don't look like you, who are saying these things, already creates this barrier to advocating for yourself, and then like add in intensity of pain, being in labor, being in some sort of situation where you are already not in like your chilled out state. It's really, really hard to find the resources to advocate for what you want in those situations. It just is. And it's terrible, and we should all be heard. Anytime we need to be heard.
Absolutely. And the irony is we're having a really serious conversation and my husband just walked down. So if we hear a coffee grinder, I'm so sorry. This is where we are with the timing.
I love it.
But it's a real issue. And I know that this is something that you're really passionate about. So are there some things regarding maternal health care with this stuff that like you wish people knew or were aware of, either in advocating for themselves and advocating for the people in their life who might end up in that situation, right? Or for someone who's listening who might happen to, just for example, be white and be in that space where they can maybe be more aware to do a better job and avoid some of these problems, or at least learn about them. You know what I mean?
I think that probably, I would say for for providers, the first thing is to listen to your patients and believe them. Like it's so simple, but very hard. Like get over yourself a little bit and listen to what they're saying. And then I think for folks who might find themselves in this kind of situation, I think that if possible, if there are resources, like if you have the financial resources to hire a doula to be with you, because that person is just there to advocate for you and your needs. The doctors are there to advocate for the baby's needs most of the time. Like they're keeping the baby, I say babies because I had twins. They're keeping the baby alive and trying to make sure you don't die. But like a doula will advocate for your comfort and your sense of safety. And then if you don't have the resources to hire a doula, I would look into usually local spaces where there is support for folks. There's a fabulous organization here in Durham called Equity Before Birth that provides basically, it's like a birth support scholarship, including paid time off, including like funds for paid time off, funds for postpartum doula work, funds for doula work. So like all of those kinds of supports can be really, really helpful. And I think on the topic of paid time off in particular, finding financial support in order to bracket a birth with time off is so important because it makes the whole thing go more easily if you're not stressing about how you need to go back to work when you're still bleeding from your epidural. No, not your epidural, sorry, episiotomy. Oh my gosh, E-words. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's true. And I think something you brought up there that is one of my personal rants is that once there is a baby involved, it's like the mother doesn't matter until the baby is out of her. And even then it's like, oh, well, you fulfilled your duty. You had a child. Bye. And again, I'm sure someone who's listening to this, who's in healthcare is very offended, including my husband, who's like 20 feet away from me at a computer now. But it's true, right? Because this is how I felt about when I went through the IVF experience. And like, again, like my experiences have been like, not that big, though IVF did almost kill me. So
I mean, you kind of had a dramatic experience with that.
Right? Like there's a part of me that's like, well, you didn't birth a child. And it's like, yeah, but you got the 1 in 100 almost killed you IVF rare reactions. But it's like, that's how I felt in it, right? Was at the end of it, they were like, oopsies, you had this really horrible experience, but like, you got really good embryos. Like, that's the thing is at the end of this, everyone's like, but you have a baseball team of healthy embryos. And I'm like, I would have taken fewer healthy embryos and not had the near-death experience. I'm just right. And let me just tell you the treatment for this experience that no one tells you if this happens to you, right? It's like, I don't want to be graphic, but they stick a needle through your vagina to drain fluid out of you. And the way that, I mean, this is healthcare 101, right? They go, it won't be that bad. It's like a bee sting.
Okay, anyway.
Even in my state of like, I'd retained like 20 pounds of fluid and blood. And even then I said, you're going to have to give me a Valium for that. And they said, and I said, no, you're going to go upstairs. Do you have a Valium here? I go, I require drugs. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But it's like, that's what I'm talking about in like the whole healthcare situation. It's like, these are the situations, but they were like, oh, but we got such good embryos. And like, the doctor was of course concerned and she called every day, but I'm like, I paid how much money for healthcare? And this is the quote unquote care that I get where everyone's like, but the outcome is great. And I'm like, but was it great?
But what's it though? Yeah.
I feel like most of maternal health care is wrapped up in that kind of energy.
Yes. I feel like that's a lot of the time the case. I also had a near-death experience when I was giving birth. I developed a really rare, it's not that rare. It is the leading cause? I think it's the leading cause of death or like second leading cause of maternal death. Because it is the kind of thing that if it's not monitored carefully can just like, flat out kill you. So it's like preeclampsia on steroids. It's called HELLP, HELLP. If you're pregnant, don't Google it. Like It's not that great. It's not so great. But the only cure is to take the baby, or babies in my case, out. And to either, you know, you can have whatever kind of birth you want, depending on how far along things are and what the time frame looks like. And it was interesting. So I had a positive experience. I also had a doula. So she was there talking me through my options, listening to how I was feeling when I decided that it was actually okay to have a C-section, because I'm a crunchy mama. Like, before I knew I was having twins, I was going to have a home birth in a bathtub at home, and it was going to be like a spiritual experience. At the first trip to the hospital, pregnant with twins, I was like, oh, I don't get that. It was a real letdown. But because I had a doula, I got to really make peace with that choice and see it as a choice and not a choice that was taken away from me. And that was really, really important. And I think that gets lost in kind of the like, oh, well, doulas are just, you know, there to, I don't know. Some people might be dismissive of that. I think it's really, really important. Yeah.
I think choice is so powerful, right? Mm-hmm. Again, it's what's so interesting about this conversation is we're jumping around on the topics, and yet the through line is always the same. It's like, even if you have limitations, even if you only have one option, still feeling like you have a choice in when and how you take that option is so, it's the difference between being like, yes, that sucked, and I felt as prepared as I could be to make that choice, or I at least felt like I was a participant in that choice.
Yes.
Versus that choice got taken away from me.
Yes.
And I don't feel like I had a choice. I feel like this was done to me. And I think that is such, I think that that's so important. And I think that, to your point of things like having a doula, I think that is so overlooked in this conversation.
Yeah. Yeah, completely overlooked, because what that gives you is that, first of all, a doula gives you a buffer and helps you find your choices. And like, I think you're so right, Nikki, that the through line is choice. And when we're thinking about teaching movement or participating in exercise, so often we feel like we don't have a choice, especially sometimes when you're taking that class, the one where you feel like you don't have a choice and where you have to do all the, like the things that are beyond your actual capability. And I think that it's really important to me as a movement teacher to create space for choice and create invitations instead of commands and directives all the time.
Yes. Yeah. Even if the choice is not the choice that we would make for someone in either direction, I that's something I've come across in various ways over the years of working with and talking to instructors and even in my own classes, when I see something, sometimes people make a choice for like the quote unquote more advanced option. And I'm like, okay, that facial expression wasn't good, but also not the choice I would make. If that's fine. I gave you choices. You have made that choice. I am going to step away now because you are an adult and you are the authority of your body. And who knows, maybe it's fine for you.
And maybe it's not. And maybe that's a lesson that they get to learn in their body. And I don't have to be responsible for that because that is the choice they made and they had a choice. It's like when true. It's like when my kids decide they want to, like, I don't know, dump their drink out all over the floor. Oh, you don't have a drink anymore. That was a choice you actually made this time. It's not like when they were 2 and just like knocked it over. This is the choice. Yeah.
Well, I think that's just it. And unlike children, it's not your responsibility to parent them. Like I remember, I'll never forget this. I used to teach this foam rolling class in Seattle. And this person came in and they told me they had all this stuff and they were really sensitive. And we got to this one part with like the hamstring where I said, look, it's not going to be very sensation worthy. This is just me to the whole class, right? I was like, I would suggest, maybe taking it easy on this one, especially if you have some stuff going on. And I see the person, the same one, and they're just cranking their hamstring. I mean, they're just cranking it. And I was like, so you mentioned, they're like, nah, this is good. And I went, okay. And the next week, they didn't come back. Their wife came back and the wife went, so he was in so much pain. And I went, well, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, what are you going to do with that? we could give as much guidance to, I mean, and I feel like we could give a lot of guidance to like, take it easy with this one. We're not trying to beat up on our bodies. We're trying to love our bodies. We can say all we want to, but you know, it's kind of like some people want that feeling so much that they'll do anything to get that kind of intense feedback in their bodies. And I feel like there's like a whole other podcast episode to talk about like chasing sensation and not chasing sensation, and what does sensation even mean when we're talking about listening to our bodies. But yeah, it's they had a choice.
And I guess it's like, to your point, it's their lesson to learn. And when we do it to ourselves, I think the thing about this is there's no judgment or shame, right? Like I feel no judgment or shame when someone does that. I just don't feel responsibility for their literal physical hamstring pain afterwards because they made that choice.
Yeah.
Even after it was like, probably not a great idea. But it's the same thing with us. It's like, sometimes we have to learn things, and sometimes we have to learn things through signals and lessons that are not very pleasant that may end up, you know, we may have to repeat them a few times. And I do have to say, I think the difference is when I do it to myself, even if someone told me not to, I'm never upset with the other person. Maybe this is just me. I'm usually these days not even upset with myself because it's such a strong tendency. I just expect it sometimes. I'm like, oh, we did that again. Okay.
Yep.
Right.
Yep.
I think that's a big part of the acceptance of like a certain personality type, having a chronic condition that's really annoying. I think it's also like, I think part of this love your body conversation that I think might be worth speaking to as well is that like, you can love your body and also be mad about having a chronic condition.
There's like nowhere in the Love Your Body manual that, you know, the imaginary Love Your Body manual that's out there, in the rules, there's no rule that says you can't have a bad body day. They're like, bad body days are things we get to have. We get to feel angry and frustrated and hateful even toward our bodies. For like, you know, this is probably TMI, but I'll go ahead.
We've already said the words vagina needle. We're good.
Oh, but this one's about poop. So, I mean, my chronic condition is a digestive disorder. So when I don't time my morning just right, and I have to dial into my class from the bathroom and say, hey, y'all, check in with each other. I'll be right there. Like, what am I going to do with that? Am I going to be frustrated with myself for like not timing everything perfectly or not knowing that kale was really going to fuck me up the next day? Like, no. It is what it is. And this is the body I'm in. And my people, thank goodness, understand that. And, you know, I think it's really, really like toxic. I want to say it's kind of like a toxic positivity to imagine that we're going to go every day and always feel like absolute delight and pleasure and joy in our bodies every moment. Like the joy and pleasure comes from realizing that we don't have to do that.
Yeah. And I think that's really important because I think a lot of the time people hear things like joy and then their brains go to the toxic positivity of, well, I'm not doing it right if I'm not joyful all the time. And I'm like, part of the human conditioning is suffering. I'm sorry. Like, I don't mean that in a pessimistic or depressive way. I just mean like, life is hard.
Yes. Bodies are hard to be in sometimes. Yeah. We get injured. We have bad days. It's too cold outside to walk. Or it's too rainy. Or it's, you know, like this stuff happens. We're not going to be, and actually, if we try to live at like that high level, to get into like a little nervous system talk, I'm not super scientific about this, but like if we try to live at that high level of just like, woo, 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 it's a raven here all the time, then you know what? It's really going to suck when something happens that's bad. We mostly don't want to hang out in that like super elevated state of ecstasy. Like that's not good for us.
Right. And yet that somehow is what's sold to us is like, the purpose of exercise, again, the purpose of yoga, the purpose of money, right? It's like this health, money, happiness, capitalism thing. And I'm like, yeah, but chasing all those things is pure misery. It usually just gives you pure misery. I have yet to meet the person who like don't get me wrong, money is nice. Money can make things in your life better. You can pay to make certain problems go away. It can reduce a stressor, but not always.
Nope.
And health is so relative. Good health is relative to individuals, and it's also a freaking crapshoot. So this idea that like that rugged individualism, that we're super responsible for it all, it's kind of like, well, there's a lot of things that go into poor health that are systemic in our society that people don't appreciate or realize. So when we just go, well, you should have just taken care of that, it's like you're like looking at one puzzle piece in an extraordinarily big, complicated, messy picture that's probably missing several puzzle pieces while we're at it.
Yes.
You know what I mean? And that's kind of what makes me just like really frustrated with that conversation with someone who's sort of living in like, they're living at their high vibrations. I'm just like, sorry, I'm sure there's again, I've probably offended so many people in the last hour, but like,
I love that we're just like, let's offend everybody. Come on.
Everyone. Right? But you know what I'm talking, like I can't help it sometimes when like you know that person, right? They're like, oh, they're just at that low vibration. And I'm like, is that low vibration reality? Because I think that my low vibration is like, oh no, this is just kind of reality. And I don't know. I don't know about you, but I feel like I'm usually better off addressing the reality than denying the reality, because reality isn't going to go anywhere.
No, it's way better to address the reality, to kind of go, okay, well, this is not good and this is not fun. And what is it that I can change about this to make it less bad? And what can't I change? Maybe there's nothing I can change right now. Like I can't change a lot of things about my life at all. And I either have to make my peace with that, or I have to frustrate myself constantly banging my head against the wall, trying to change things that I can't change. When there are things that we can change just by like actually committing to taking small, doable actions. Like I want to get stronger, then I need to lift heavy things. They don't have to be that heavy, but if I do it twice a week, I will get stronger. Or I want to eradicate racism. Great, then I'm going to talk to my racist uncle. Or I don't have any racist uncles, actually. But y'all can talk to your racist uncles. Or you could choose to do something even smaller or bigger. Like there's a huge range of possibility for all of that.
Yes. And I think that's really, I think this is a good place to start to wrap us. But I think that's actually really what is so powerful in going back to this idea and theme of choice is that, you have a chronic condition. Odds are with most of these chronic conditions, they can't be cured. It's really annoying. It sucks, right? Right? It is what it is. But there are, and when you get the diagnosis and you get the list of what you should and shouldn't do, it's overwhelming and it's terrifying when it comes from the words of a medical provider, which I think is how we end up not getting the care that we need for multiple reasons, right? Or not taking the actions that are like more self-serving because of that overwhelm. But it's like, but you can do little tiny things. And I think focusing on those tiny things, regardless of what the big problem is, because there's a lot of big problems in the world and there's a lot of big problems in our life, but those tiny actions can be really powerful and empowering and not so overwhelming. But focusing on like the big problem, it really is sort of paralyzing at times.
Yep. Yeah, completely. It can be completely paralyzing to focus on the big problem instead of like taking like, what's the little thing I can do? So like for me, I don't eat carrots. It's like the smallest thing I can do. And wow, my body feels better all the time for not doing that. You know, like it's so simple. It's a little thing. Just like, yesterday I talked to my kids about why we're not really doing much for Thanksgiving and why we feel like it's kind of problematic to have a big celebration, and about how nice it is to have a meal with people that we love also. Yeah, there's both and in there, but anyway.
But there always, I mean, I think that's just it. It's always both and. It's never.
Yeah.
Unless it's the generic term like of humans need water to survive. It's like for the most part.
But how much water?
Right. And then here we go. And now it's 75 hard and we're in a warm hole. But for the most part, right, there's never an easy blanket answer to this stuff. And it always just depends. And I think I think that's really important for people to realize. And I think that's why putting ourselves in boxes of broken, not broken, healed, not healed, with a condition, without a condition, it doesn't really work.
No, it's all a spectrum.
Yeah.
And nobody owes health to anybody, for that matter. Like, like I, for myself, want to feel as well as I can on any given day, but, you know, that may not be very well some days.
And you don't owe it to anyone. No. And I think that's what people miss. There's a lot of things that, you know, we all miss sometimes. Like, just stay out of the Instagram comment section. That's all I have to say about that.
Yeah.
No, but it is messy and complicated. And I feel like we could take this conversation on for hours. But we could, but I'm going to try to wrap us. So in sort of the breadth of the things that we covered today, are there any parting words or sort of things that you kind of wish people knew or you think they should hear?
You always have a choice, even when it seems like you don't have a choice. And you might need support to make that choice happen, because you might not be able to do it by yourself. I feel like we didn't really get into kind of community as a whole, but that's kind of where I would go with that. And also, talking about your pelvic floor is a really good thing. Being able to not like get skeeved or weirded out by the words vagina needle, good thing. Very good.
Yeah.
Because we take the shame away. We need to not feel shame about our bodies.
That's all. I agree. Maybe we'll do a part 2 on community, because community is, it's a really important aspect that's really overlooked. And again, as part of our culture, we tend to not look at community. We tend to look very much at do it yourself, right? That's what it's all built on, even though it's wildly unrealistic and inaccurate. No one ever does anything by themselves, ever.
I was writing an email last night, and I'm going to stop after this because I know we need to wrap up, but I was writing an email last night, and I was like, not even white men, not even cis white men do it on their own. In fact, they're doing it with everybody else supporting them.
Isn't that the truth? I think Susan Hyatt like canceled Thanksgiving for herself and went to Maine. Mm-hmm. And she was talking about the invisible workload of women. That's what she's been talking about on social media all week. And I was like, yeah, put words to that. But you're absolutely right. They're not doing it by themselves. That they have a lot of people propping them up. And I think that's a really accurate and interesting take on the narrative that's not often acknowledged in that story, right? Like, we talk about privilege a lot, but I don't think we talk about like the built-in support of the system for certain people.
Yeah.
And that's actually what it is too. So yeah, that's something to noodle on. All right. Well, for folks who want to work with you, learn more about what you do, connect with you, you do have an online membership and other services. Where is the best places for people to find you?
My website is www.larissaparson.com, and my Instagram would be at Larissa_Parson. And those are the two best places to find me, really. I show up in other places, but it's all just like, not really.
Great. Well, I will link that all up in the show notes. And thanks for having this conversation with me.
Oh, thank you so much, Nikki. This was just a delight.
And that's a wrap. Thanks so much for listening. If you haven't already done so, please consider leaving the show a rating and review over on iTunes. Also, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Catch you on the next one.